Hey there, Eli again, coming at you from the coral rooms of OSA Coventry. Here today to, you guessed it, talk about corals. One of the questions we get pretty often at the shop when people are shopping for corals, especially for a tank that is pretty well stocked and already loaded, there's not much room on your rock work, not much room in your sand bed. People like to ask, what is something that I can grow on my back glass to take up some of that real estate? So some people prefer not to have a spotless clean back glass. Some people really like to scrape it down and make sure that it's always spotless. But some people prefer to grow something on the back glass or just allow the coral and algae to grow just to give you a cool backdrop on the back of the tank. Oftentimes people are going to be throwing something like green star polyps like you see in the back there. That's one of my favorite ways to grow that coral because you'll get really manageable sheets of it growing on that back glass, and it makes it a lot easier to frag down the road. Usually when the star polyps start to grab the glass, they're only held just barely by the foot of that coral itself, and can be scraped really easily back up with just a straight razor blade, and that makes that a lot more manageable than to say grow on the rock work. Oftentimes that coral grows so quickly that sometimes if we allow it to grow on the rocks and it gets a little too out of hand, it's a little too hard to remove from the rock works completely, and sometimes even a couple polyps left behind will turn into a new piece of GSP. So I really prefer to grow that on the back glass. Gives you a really cool backdrop, a cool appearance, a nice flowy coral on that back glass. Easily allows for you to frag it down the road, so you can keep it in check and trade with friends down the road. One thing to keep in mind when growing corals on the back glass, especially something fast growing like GSP, you always want to be careful around your overflow box. You want to make sure these corals are not impeding flow into the overflow box so that you don't risk overflowing the tank. So just making sure that you keep them nice and trimmed up as they approach that area is definitely important. Now, for those of us that don't want GSP on the back glass, or maybe you want something that's a little less invasive, grows a little slower, or just offers some different textures, my next favorite corals are small polyp, stony, encrusting corals. So things like these Stylociniellas that you see here, the burning banana, electric daisy, some of these other color variants, are a small polyp stony coral that are not terribly difficult. They don't need a ton of light, and they do strictly just encrust the rock work. So if you were to place those on that back glass, especially if it's one that's already on a small tile or something that's flat enough to glue to that back glass, and usually just using super glue or one of your 2-part epoxy putties is one of the easiest ways to affix a coral to your back glass. These will grow really flat to that back glass and just offer a cool texture, a cool backdrop, a different color, and a little bit of movement to that glass as well. One of my personal favorites are the Cyphastreas. I've got some green ones here. Meteor shower Cyphastrea, like these ones underneath the rack here, is another really cool option. Something that grows decently steady when it's nice and happy. And again, it doesn't take up much vertical space. It's not gonna grow off of the glass so much. It's gonna grow pretty tightly to it and just offer a cool pattern, cool appearance against the glass in the back. Also doesn't need much light. Certain pallies and zoanthids are also even kind of appropriate for growing on the back glass, especially if it's something that's a little quicker of a grower. It makes it so it's a little more manageable, that it's not going to take over rocks and spread throughout the tank, and it's a little bit easier to frag right back off of that back glass with a clean razor blade, just like it would be with the GSP. On my tank at home, personally, I have a good collection of different types of Monty caps too, or scrolling corals. This would be the same for like a stunner chalice or any of your other scrolling corals as well. I personally like to grow these on the back glass because I don't really allow my rock work to get that close to the back glass, so I actually have a decent amount of room behind the tank. And in growing a shelving or a plating coral on that back glass in that manner, it's not going to shade out all the other corals beneath it as it grows. So it gives you a cool kind of scrolling appearance. You can get some great patterns, some great color variation by adding Monty caps to the back glass. And if your rock work is set up properly, you don't really risk shading out the corals or the rock work that would be immediately beneath it, as long as you kind of factor that into play as you place those corals. So just another cool option that you can add to the back. I've even seen things like bird's nest corals, acroporas, and some of these other branching corals grown on the back glass, especially when your tank gets nice and full and you're kind of fighting for where you can place things in terms of real estate in the tank. The back glass is definitely an often overlooked area that you can add a cool variety of different corals to. As always, thank you guys for tuning in. Feel free to leave questions, suggestions, comments in the comment section below. And as always, keep on reefing.